So, today I want to talk about President Biden and the border wall. As of the past few days, there has been some information that has come out from the Washington Times that has been perpetuated in other conservative newspapers and media sources that outline the possibility of the Biden administration continuing construction on the border wall. As we are fully aware, the Biden administration has taken the position that his administration was not supposed to continue construction on even another inch of the border wall, and that he had signed an executive order to pause the construction of the border wall. And we also know that his administration has claimed that they would start to divert spending away from the wall, specifically the money that the Trump administration had taken from the Pentagon, and that while there was no information or desire on his administration's part to tear down the already existing wall, nothing further would continue. So, given this information, I want to take some time to look at what the Washington Times is saying, and I want to look at the response that the press secretary has given in response to this information, and kind of talk about the problematic nature of all of this information, both by analyzing and coming to a conclusion on what I think is actually happening, and give my perspective and opinion on it. So, with that said, let's take a look at what the Washington Times has come out and said. So, the Washington Times has an exclusive that the Biden DHS may restart border wall construction to plug gaps. The Department of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, told department employees he may restart border wall construction to plug what he called gaps in the current barrier. In a conversation with ICE employees last week, Mr. Mayorkas was asked about his plans for the wall, and he said that while President Biden has canceled the border emergency and halted Pentagon money flowing to the wall, that leaves room to make decisions on finishing some, quote, gaps in the wall. Mr. Mayorkas, according to notes on the ICE session reviewed by the Washington Times, has said that Customs and Border Protection, which oversees the wall, has submitted a plan for what it wants to see happen moving forward. The president has communicated quite clearly his decision in the emergency that triggered the devotion of DoD funds to the construction of the border wall is ended, but he leaves room to make decisions as part of the administration, in particular areas of the wall need renovation, particularly projects that need to be finished. He said those parts include, quote, gaps, gates, and areas where, quote, the wall has been completed, but the technology has not been implemented. The Customs and Border Patrol did not return a message seeking comment on what has been submitted to Mr. Mayorkas, but Mark Morgan, who served as acting commissioner of the CBP under the Trump administration, says that Mr. Mayorkas' comments were more spin and misdirection. He said that the CBP has always given the administration options for how to proceed on the wall, and the article goes on to talk about the fact that Congress over the last 4 years has allocated over $1.375 billion each year for the wall, including this current fiscal year, and that the Biden administration has not submitted a request to rescind that money. Congressional Republicans have asked that the Government Accountability Office review the pause on whether or not the ruling is legal. So, within this, we do have an understanding that the Republicans in all of this are trying to get the construction on the wall furthered and continued. That the position of the right wing, the full-blown right-wing conservative aspect of our government, is that this wall needs to continue and that the pause on this may not actually be constitutional and that Biden may have already overstepped a line by doing this much. So, given all of that, and all the information that I just read, that the Biden administration is talking about how to deal with these gaps in the wall and how to deal with other aspects of it, I want to take a look at what the press secretary has responded to when asked about this on the 6th of April. So the question that was asked of the press secretary is, another quick one about the border. The DHS secretary is reportedly looking to finish some gaps in the southern border. How does that fit in with President Biden's Day 1 executive order to stop the border wall construction? The press secretary has responded, while wall construction remains paused to the extent permitted by law. So some has already been funded through a congressional authorization and funding allocation. But as agencies develop for a plan, it's paused while agencies are developing a plan for the president on the management of the federal funds. When the administration took office, as you referenced, funds had been diverted from congressionally appropriated military construction projects and other appropriated purposes towards building the wall. And wall construction was being challenged in multiple lawsuits. And for much of the wall, I would say, not all of it, but plaintiffs who allege serious environmental and safety issues. And I just have to pause and say that the environmental and safety issues have been actually really detrimental. There has been a lot of damage done at that border in the creation of the wall, where there's been leaks of water and other minerals coming out of the soil into other areas where they're not supposed to be. And without delving into the full extent of those details, there's just been some serious environmental damage done by trying to dig into the ground at that border and create this wall. And further, there's actually been serious issues about digging up certain grave sites and other things at this border, and that's just a whole other level of cultural damage that has been done. This wall has been a disaster in that regard. So I just needed to point that out because I probably can't address the full extent of that within the course of this video. But it does need to be said. Now, under those circumstances, federal agencies are continuing to review wall contracts and develop a plan to submit to the president soon. It is paused. There is some limited construction that has been funded and allocated for, but it is otherwise paused. So, where does that leave us when we examine all of this? Well, given these two different perspectives, which both seem to be partial truths to the narratives, I kind of want to take a moment and try to combine it all together to give a reasonable claim of what I think is actually transpiring before I give my full opinion on the matter. Now, it seems to me that the conservative perspective here is attempting to call out the hypocrisy of the Biden administration while attempting to continue the wall. So it's trying to say, well, even the Biden administration is trying to continue this wall and do all these aspects and look at the hypocrisy here, but they're still not doing enough to protect people and to do all of the things that the conservatives claim that they're doing. And that is kind of a misrepresentation of things. That said, the press secretary is also using some questionable language here that seems to be downplaying a lot of what's happening by saying that the wall is completely on pause, but there's legal aspects that are still being fleshed out and we have to deal with that. So it protects the voter base who wants to hear that the wall isn't being continued, while acknowledging some of the limitations the Biden administration may have in its ability to do anything while working within the current system. Because if they acknowledge that, they would have to acknowledge a lot of the flaws in the current system and how the legality is forcing them to actually continue construction, while Biden had claimed he didn't want to. So when we take all of that together, it seems that by parsing this information, what's actually occurring is that the wall is in fact still being worked on in certain legal areas based on funding that's been provided by Congress, and that the Biden administration is maybe not trying to attempt to build the wall outward and extend it the other 400 plus miles that the Trump administration wanted to. But because of the remaining funding that's been allocated by Congress, he's trying to divert those funds that has been locked in towards filling in gaps. And this is affecting the parts that already exist. And by doing this, he is simultaneously probably attempting to placate some of the Republicans. Of course, that's a bad idea and he shouldn't be doing that. Because they'll never be satisfied unless they get the full extent of what they want, and will continually be critiquing him for it, while at the same time trying to make use of that money to not extend the wall further and anger some of his more liberal base that might be satisfied with such a solution. Now, this appears to be an issue in the fact that these contracts may be actually difficult to get out of in the, quote, legal ways that the Biden administration is talking about. And that represents a problem within our system as far as I'm concerned. Now, we do know that Ilhan Omar has actually come out and tweeted already that, quote, it's shameful and unacceptable for POTUS to continue to the construction of Trump's xenophobic and racist wall. And I need to just come out and fully say this. She's absolutely right. This wall is both a racist and xenophobic tool that should not be continued and, in fact, should be torn down. That should have been on the table in the first place. Rather than work within the confines of this legality, what I would have liked to have seen from the Biden administration, while acknowledging that he has no desire to do this, is a radical position where the Biden administration would seek to divert this funding completely away from the construction of the wall. If the Trump administration could do such what seemingly is extra legal activity by turning military funding and the Pentagon spending money towards the wall, there's no reason that Biden couldn't take a bold stance, theoretically, and convert and divert more fundings away from the termination, away from these contracts and cause them to be terminated, and then let the lawyers deal with and hash it out later. There's no reason that he couldn't have attempted this and pushed the boundaries on what we want to see happen. And if there is, in fact, no way for him to do this, and he is right in what he claims, and that he is working within the absolute confines of legality, I think it speaks more to a major flaw in our system and the way our state runs, that the system of a budget approved by a prior congressional session can force the hands of a current administration to continue a project they may be against. And that speaks to a flaw in our system of transference of power. And I think that's something that we should be talking about more, that the funding that was created by the prior session of Congress can influence the way that a current session of Congress has to function. And again, I believe that Biden's solution to this should be to try to divert as much of this money away from the contracts and let the legality deal with it after. Take bold stances. If you want to see true reform happen, we need somebody who's going to take these firm stances and try to do what's right first and foremost. And that's not what I'm seeing here. In fact, what the administration should be doing, as far as I'm concerned, is they should be moving towards spending this funding and money on housing people who are coming up through the border and eliminating those camps that he keeps having exist. And yes, it's a complex issue that has a lot of factors to it, but if you weren't focusing on keeping people in these facilities and preventing them from leaving, you could put them in housing, you could put them in hotels, you could be doing so much more to alleviate this crisis and actively make a positive situation on the ground for people, rather than locking them up in facilities where you don't trust them to leave those facilities. That isn't working, and that is wrong. Morally, it is reprehensible. And that needs to be improved upon. That is one way you could divert that funding. Second of all, you could actually use that funding to start addressing some of the imperialism problems that the U.S. has had in Latin America, where the U.S. has gone in and destabilized entire nations time and time again. Or worst case scenario, maybe just stop making things worse down there. Maybe start changing the way contracts work and the way dealings happen in the global south, and change the way that the U.S. deals with its forms of imperialism down there through policies that promote capitalism in ways that are a detriment to entire nations. And if you did something like that, maybe there'd be less of a crisis occurring. You could also attempt to legalize certain drugs that might limit some of the power of the cartels that are consistently talked about. Furthermore, you could even take a stance at trying to eliminate some of the xenophobia that exists in the United States, and try to eliminate through campaigns the general fear that has been promoted by, the previous administration and more, historic racist tendencies for white people in this country to just have a general fear of brown people. All of those aspects and policies could gradually shift this country in a direction where something like the border wall wouldn't even be an issue, where maybe we could eventually reach a place where a free border could exist by not having all of these policies that have implemented fear and have implemented all sorts of negative economical and lifestyle consequences for people in any part of the world but the United States. We have used imperialism for far too long to perpetuate ourselves. And this is just another consequence of that. Now, we have to know and accept that the Biden administration, when it was elected, that the policy of the Biden administration was not one that was going to change the status quo of the system very far. We know that this policy of working within the system and looking and seeking the most legal means necessary under our current understanding of the law was not going to fix the problems of the law. The wall is going to waste money, and the only thing I can say is that this is still superior to working within a system that the prior administration had put in place, where they were wasting more money by expanding the wall and feeding further fear to people about, the fear of people coming into the country. So this policy is still extremely lacking. It's still lacking in the usage of tools that are required to even begin to start fixing such a large-scale problem that the US has mostly created. We need to keep pushing as leftists for greater change in this policy and getting behind solutions that are designed to change how we view people in this world so that we can one day reach and attain that dream of a borderless world where people can travel through different invisible lines rather than just property and cargo. And if we're going to ever see that dream realized, that's going to mean large amounts of systemic change, and it represents a huge problem in the interests of capitalism and the state to talk about even beginning to change that policy. I don't think our current systems are prioritized in a way that is going to fix that. And even in the most liberal understanding of capitalism, we are still going to make compromises that allow these types of policies to exist. And we need to start looking towards solutions that mean deplatforming a lot of the incentives of these policies. So with that said, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and bell for notifications. You can follow me on Twitter and check out my Discord in the description down below. My name is Anarchist Tara, and I hope you enjoyed watching.